My coworker is insanely narcissistic and likes to one-up everyone all the time, so when he witnessed me having a traumatic emergency, he seized the opportunity to highlight it as a learning moment for everyone else. I, 29F, have officially had it, and I'm commencing a campaign of, relatively benign, psychological warfare against one of my coworkers. I'll call him Dan. Dan started at the company in November of 2023 and seemed cool at first, but I have slowly grown to find him very annoying. There are too many examples to get into, but I would describe him as an entitled, impertinent sourpuss with a nicotine addiction and a self-professed problem with following the rules. WTF, why would you brag about this at work? He is my same age and role. For the record, I also arguably have a nicotine addiction, but I don't make it obvious in my place of work. So, a few days ago I regrettably had a horrifying emergency on my way into work. The whole ordeal unfolded very quickly, and while I was unmuted on a work call with my whole team. I don't want to go into details of the emergency, but it involved me getting caught up in an altercation that had nothing to do with me but resulted in me having a very public panic attack that my entire work team also heard over the phone. I am diagnosed with panic disorder. Edit: I am not supposed to discuss the details of this situation, as it is an open case with local law enforcement. On my way to work, I was arrested, and I was held in jail for 36 hours. I had a panic attack while being arrested, and then 5 more while I was in jail because I was denied access to my prescribed medications. You can pass your judgment on whether I deserved it, but you don't know me. My other coworkers, my family, my friends, and the larger local community, not the cops, have been extremely supportive. Think what you want, but screw the police, and I will probably never be able to trust them again. I was indisposed for a couple days after the emergency, and once I was able to return, my work computer was still in my office building, which I ultimately never reached, so I couldn't do any actual work beyond sending emails/messages off my phone. Almost all of my coworkers, who I've worked with for about 7 years now at this company, were incredibly supportive, sent me kind messages, and were generally concerned for my well-being, having directly heard me go through this ordeal in real time, and I still feel mortified, so their support really means the world. A few coworkers even contacted every single person I had scheduled meetings with to let them know I had an emergency. They seamlessly picked up my critical work tasks and offered to drop off my computer at home for me. I mean, these people rock, and that's why I've been at the company for 7 years. Dan, however, has appeared to have seized upon this opportunity, my traumatic emergency, to highlight my shortcomings. In the immediate aftermath of the emergency, when my coworkers were exchanging messages of support and concern about me, Dan sent no such messages, and he didn't ask how he could support. Instead, he inserted an absolutely useless recommendation into the team group chat about how I could have avoided this emergency in the first place. He immediately tried to turn my trauma into a learning moment, as if it was so obvious that this would have happened to me because of the choices I made leading up to it. Very she was asking for it in that dress, if you ask me. Gross. Then, I am finally recuperated enough, or out of jail, to look at my phone a couple days after the emergency. I get a message from a PM that I work with, asking me about the status of a report that I had put Dan in charge of. The PM tells me that they spoke with Dan yesterday, and that Dan said the report was in my court. But interestingly enough, Dan conveniently failed to mention to the PM during that conversation that I had suffered a major emergency, that Dan had witnessed just the day before, that I was presently indisposed, and that I would likely need some time to recover. Not to mention, Dan had never communicated to me prior to the emergency that the report was ready for me to review. He kept saying he had one more task to complete, so screw him. Despite the chaos and trauma of that terrible event, I feel a renewed sense of gratitude for my life, my freedom, and the everyday privilege of being alive and surrounded by a supportive community. And I feel even more protective of it now. Things can change in an instant in ways that you couldn't possibly imagine. I truly do not have any more time for BS. And for this reason, I feel absolutely justified in #canceling Dan from my life. I'm not going to try to get him fired or anything like that, but I refuse to spend my days in close proximity to him at the office. We currently sit right next to each other in a 2-desk office space, but there are other desks in an adjacent office space that I can use, so I plan to move my desk away from his. He can say goodbye to any and all opportunities to support me on my projects. I no longer trust him to be a reliable and respectful team player. And most importantly, if he decides to confront me, which he might because he's actually alarmingly confrontational, I will calmly explain to him that I find his professionalism and working style to be unaligned with what I'm looking for on my projects and in my career. He'll have to find someone else to work with. Good luck, you piece of trash. Thanks for listening. Update. Felt like posting an update. All my charges, 4 misdemeanors for resisting arrest, were dismissed because the police arrested me unlawfully. I'm also moving forward with civil litigation against the police department. Thought about just dropping it and moving in my life, but then I saw the police body cam footage and it is disturbing to say the least. Worse than I even remembered. It brought my partner and father to tears. They are not criers. My mother was simply hysterical and couldn't even get through the first few minutes. She said watching her child be held down and beaten while I was crying and screaming for help was entirely too much for her to bear. I'm shaking again, even recounting it now. Dan still works at my company, but we don't work together on anything anymore. I heard he got put on a PIP, but no one really confirmed that me, which is probably the appropriate course of action. I just stay out completely of his business. I'm doing great at work. I've always felt good about my job/performance BC as I mentioned in the original post. I love my coworkers and my work really matters to me. I also stopped drinking/smoking and am currently 10 days sober, which has been amazing for my productivity and my mental health. Still addicted to nicotine, damn signs, but that's the next thing to go, taking it one step at a time. Thanks to all the kind internet strangers for your support. Apparently my story will soon be made public to the media, but hopefully you don't hear about it. BC, the video is still mortifying for me, even though I clearly did nothing wrong, other than panic, which isn't really wrong, given the circumstances. Plus then my identity will be exposed and I'll have to make a new Reddit account. Hope Dan doesn't have Reddit and find this, but at this point he knows what I think about him. Hi Dan.